Jumbo to everybody. My name is Wayne. Welcome to our September semester. And as earlier mentioned in another recording, this semester I will be conducting basic investigation skills and also emergency incidents. Those are the lessons that I will be conducting this semester. And to start off, today we are going to look at introduction to emergency incidents. Introduction to emergency incidents. And we are first going to start by small definitions or little definitions of an emergency. So what is an emergency? Up to now in your career, I know you have a brief idea of what emergency is, because this is what we deal with. Emergencies are to be managed by everybody who's in the vicinity, but those people who are on the front line are always security as usual. So the precise definition of an emergency, the precise definition of an emergency depends on various agencies that are involved and the procedures used in managing the particular incident. An incident to be an emergency confirms to one or more of the following if it, for an incident, because it starts with an incident before it becomes an emergency. But there are incidents that we handle and we complete them, but there are conditions that surrounding circumstances that make it to be defined as an emergency. Now, uh, uh, when we talk about an emergency, we are going to be talking about several issues. We are going to be talking about injuries. We are going to be talking about warning systems. We are going to be talking about medical response. We are going to be talking about fast responder responses. We are going to talk about a lot of emergencies. We are going to talk of action plans, how to manage the situation, what are the priorities in an emergency situation. We are going to be discussing all those things. So, for an incident to be an emergency, it has to conform to one or more of the following. Possess an immediate threat to life, health, property, or environment. Possess an immediate threat to life, health, property, or the environment. Has already caused loss of life, health, detriments, property damage, or environmental damage. Has already. If it has already caused loss of life, health detriments, property damage, or environmental damage, then it can already be classified as an emergency. Has a high probability of escalating to cause immediate danger to life, health, property, or environment. Has a high potential or probability of escalating to cause immediate dangers to life, health, property, or environment. Also, when we go again, we look at a different way of defining an emergency. Is that it is an unforeseen combination of circumstances or the resulting state that calls for immediate action. An unforeseen combination of circumstances or the resulting state that calls for immediate action. Also, an urgent need for assistance or relief, an urgent need for assistance or relief because life is at stake, property destruction is at stake, environmental destruction is at stake, among other health determined issues. So an urgent need for assistance or relief. And you have noticed, and you all know, that when it is peacetime, everything is okay. But whenever there is an emergency, then the first people who are on the front line to face this emergency are the first responders. And first responders are not only security people. First responders are anybody who is in the immediate vicinity of an emergency. That person is referred to as a first responder. The person who moves first to try to save life, to try to protect people from further injury, to try to minimize damage, to try to control the situation, that person is referred to as a first responder. And being a first responder calls for a lot. There are a lot of issues that comes into being a first responder. Number one, you must be very courageous. Number two, you must exercise self-caution. Self-caution is assessing the situation before you move further, because you can only save people, you can only protect property from further destruction if you are safe yourself. So the initial assessment. And emergencies are very strange because people react in different ways. There are people who will collapse immediately upon realizing that there is an emergency. There are people who will panic. There are people who will start wailing, crying very loudly in the situation of an emergency. And there are people who will go even into shock, just stand there and do nothing. And there are those people who are courageous that they can understand that I am in a situation, and they can react very fast to try to offer urgent need for assistance or relief to those who need it. Therefore, as we continue with the introduction of emergency incidences, we have to talk about what to do in an emergency. What do you do in an emergency? We are going to go deeper into this. 9 tips of what to do in an emergency. What do you need to do in an emergency? Number one is to stay calm, to avoid panic. Number two is to assess the situation. Number three is to find out. Call for help. How do you call for help? Using which means do you call for help? Number four is to respond to the situation. Number five is to try to assist to those people who need assistance. Number six is to try to offer first aid. Number seven is to try to go further into making contact with other responders and specialized medical conditions. Until number 9, where you now conduct evacuation and where you conduct also search and rescue. So there are a lot of things that we are going to learn. However, at this stage, I pose to you a question. Do you know what to do in an emergency at your workplace? If something happens at your workplace, what is your action plan? In the event that there is a fire emergency at your workplace, what is your action plan? Is it documented? Have you exercised this plan? Are there details of these exercises or drills, emergency evacuation drills? You think about it, because it is very important. You find that in most organizations, emergency plans are lacking. Even top security officials, they don't know what to do if an emergency has occurred. You find that people get confused, people get panicked, and that leads even to more dangerous situations. Let us look at primary emergency services. Primary emergency services are emergency services that provide basic emergency assistance and care. They can be summoned directly by the public. There are 3 primary emergency services, and they are listed in the following order. So there are primary emergency services. Primary emergency services are emergency services that provide basic emergency assistance and care. While most emergencies are self-evident, such as a natural disaster that threatens many lives, many smaller incidences require that an observer or affected party decide whether it qualifies as an emergency. The precise definition of an emergency that agencies involved and the procedures used to vary by jurisdiction, and this is usually set by government, whose agencies are responsible for emergency planning and management. So there are primary emergency services. If you talk of primary emergency services, then you will talk of the first responders, and you will talk of the police, who are usually the main responders who arrive at the scene of an issue. And then there are the medical emergency services, medical staff, doctors, clinicians, nurses who deal with offering specialized first aid and evacuation. You know, evacuations are very very, very risky, and they are very, very detailed in that you may end up using wrong evacuation procedures and then worsen the situation. While most emergency services agree on protecting human health, life and property, the environment impacts are not considered sufficiently important by some agencies. Some agencies do not consider environmental impacts as of great importance. They consider life, they consider health, they consider property, but they forget that the environment is equally important. This also extends to areas such as animal welfare, where some emergency organizations cover this element through the property definition, where animals owned by a person are threatened, although this does not cover wild animals. So animals should also be considered in emergency planning. In fact, in European countries and abroad here where we are, animals are very important. I have never seen areas where people have great attachment with dogs, especially dogs and animals. Pets, they play a very important role in people's lives in some of the countries that I have traveled. This means that some agencies do not mount an emergency response where it endangers wild animals or environment, though others respond to such instances, such as oil spills at sea that threaten marine life. The attitude of agencies involved is likely to reflect the predominant opinion of the government of the area. So different governments in different countries, in different areas, consider these emergency responses plans differently. As I have said, like here, for example, you go to the fire department, they have a detailed plan on how to attend even to animals during emergencies. But if you go to our country like Kenya, they only consider life, property, and health. Animals, they don't take much emphasis on them. Emergency classification. Emergency classification. Classification number 1 is dangers to life. Many emergencies cause an immediate danger to the life of people involved. Danger to life. Accidents lead danger to life. Attacks, gang attacks, danger to life. Fire situations, a danger to life. Building collapse, a danger to life. So accidents or emergencies classification starts with dangers to life. This can range from emergencies affecting a single person, such as the entire range of medical emergencies, including heart attacks, strokes, cardiac arrest, and trauma, to incidences that affect large numbers of people, such as natural disasters, including tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, mudslides, and outbreaks of diseases such as cholera, Ebola, and malaria. So, dangers to life is one classification of emergencies. Still talking about that, most agencies consider the highest priority to emergency, which follows the general school of thought that nothing is more important than human life. Therefore, we say the number 1 priority in any emergency is human life. Human life is the number 1 priority in any emergency situation. Human life is number 1 priority in any emergency situation. Dangers to health, that is number 2. So number 1 is danger to life classification. Number 2 is danger to health. Some emergencies are not necessarily immediately threatening to life, but might have serious implications for the continued health and well-being of a person or persons through a health emergency can subsequently escalate to life-threatening. So dangers to health. That is classification number 2. And then classification number 3, no, well, we continue. The causes of a health emergency are often vary very similar to the causes of an emergency threatening to life, which includes medical emergencies and natural disasters. Although the range of incidences that can be categorized here is far greater than those that cause a danger to life, such as broken limbs, which do not usually cause death. But immediate intervention is required if the person is to recover properly. Many life agencies, such as cardiac arrest or also health emergencies, are considered in the category number 2, which is a danger to health. And then we have dangers to the environment. Some emergencies do not immediately endanger life, health, or property, but do affect the natural environment and creatures living within it. Not all agencies consider this as a genuine emergency, but can have far-reaching effects on animals and the long-term condition of the land. Examples would include forest fires and marine oil spills. We also see that the system of classifying emergencies. So classification of emergencies is danger to life, danger to health, and danger to environment. That one is done. Danger to life, danger to health, and danger to environment. And if you are asked a question, how many classifications of emergencies we have, then you say 3 and you elaborate them. You elaborate what do we mean when we talk about danger to life, and what do we mean when we talk about danger to health, and what do we mean when we talk about danger to the environment. So let's look at systems of classifying emergencies. Systems of classifying emergencies. Agencies across the world have different systems for classifying incidents, but all of them serve to help them allocate finite resources by prioritizing between different emergencies. The first stage of any classification is likely to define whether the incident qualifies as an emergency, and consequently if it warrants an emergency response. As I said earlier, there are instances that do not require an emergency response, and there is a situation that definitely requires an emergency response. So number one area is to conduct a thorough assessment and to make an informed decision that this one qualifies for response and this one doesn't qualify for response. Some agencies may still respond to non-emergency calls depending on their remit and availability of resources. So some agencies may still respond to non-emergency calls depending on their remit and availability of resources. Following this, many agencies assign a subclassification to the emergency, prioritizing incidences that have the most potential for risk to life, health, or property in that order. For instance, many of ambulance services use advanced medical priority dispatch system or a similar solution. So they prioritize that if they receive a call for an emergency, the number one issue to be taken into consideration is life. And then number two, we shall talk about now property. And then number three, we shall consider environment. So this is what we mean by classification. And then some services have a fourth category where they believe that no response is required after clinical questions are asked. Another system for prioritizing medical calls is known as emergency medical dispatch, which we have already talked about. So when you go to different countries, they have different systems of prioritizing emergency calls. They have very different systems. Even the police, they have very different system of classifying incident calls. So they know, is that an emergency or that's not an emergency? For example, if you call the police and you say people are fighting, two people are fighting, then police may not consider that one as a very serious incident or an emergency. But if you call the police and say a building has collapsed or 20 people are fighting, at the same time 20 people are fighting, then they may consider that one to be an emergency because of the number of people who are involved. So what I mean to say is that different countries have different ways, different emergency responders have different ways of classifying what is an emergency, calls they receive, because these emergencies are reported through calls. So they have different ways of classifying what qualifies to be an emergency and what is not termed to be an emergency. And then we see that agencies involved in dealing with emergencies. Agencies involved in dealing with emergencies, and number one is emergency services. Number one is emergency services. Most developed countries have a number of emergency services operating within them, whose purpose is to provide assistance to dealing with an emergency. So most countries have emergency services whose purpose is to provide assistance when dealing in emergency. We have fire emergency services, we have medical emergency services. Even some countries have doctors emergency services, whereby if there is a serious emergency, then specialized doctors, there is a group of specialized doctors who respond to this emergency. So there are several emergency services in different countries. We see also number two, police services handle mainly crime-related emergencies. Police handle mainly crime-related emergencies. And then there is fire. They handle fire-related emergencies and usually possess secondary rescue duties. And then there is medical. They handle medical-related emergencies. There are also a number of specialized emergency services which may be part of one of the core agencies or maybe separate entities who assist the main agencies. So just remember medical services, police, fire, medical emergency services, etc. These are the type of emergency responders or emergency services who are tasked with responding to emergency situations. Then we'll talk about summoning emergency services, emergency telephone number. In every country, there are emergency telephone numbers. There is an emergency telephone number for the United States, which is 911. There is and parts of Ghana. There is an emergency number for United Kingdom, which is 999. There is an emergency system number for 112, which is for Europe, and 00 for Australia. Please find out in our Republic, Kenya, what is the emergency number. And if there is an emergency number, contact. Does it work? Have you ever tried to call that number? Anyway, you cannot call it to test because you may find yourself in trouble, but find out if there is an emergency telephone number in our country. Which number do we call? And does it really work? The majority of mobile phones also dial the emergency services, even if the phone keyboard is locked or if the phone has an expired or missing SIM card. Although the provision for this service varies by country and network. So mobile phones, you can call even if you don't have credit, you can call emergency services if you have the number from your mobile phone, even if you do not have credit. Also, we say there are also civil emergency services in addition to those services provided by specialized for emergencies. There may be a number of agencies who provide an emergency service as an incidental part of their normal day job provision. This can include public utility workers, such as in provision of electricity or gas, who may be required to respond quickly as both utilities have a large potential to cause danger to life, health, and property if there is an infrastructure failure. So there are civil emergency services. Civil emergency services, like in the case of Kenya, the Kenya Power, they have a response backup team that responds to issues related to power. There is a response related to issues related to gas. This is what we call utilities. that if not managed properly on time, if not responded to properly on time, they have a potential again to become an issue to life and property and the environment. Then there is domestic emergency services, generally perceived as pay-per-use emergency services. Domestic emergency services are small, medium, or large businesses who tend to manage emergencies within the boundaries of licensing or capabilities. These tend to consist of emergencies where health or property is perceived to be at risk, but may not qualify for official emergency response. So this is domestic emergency services. For example, domestic emergency services are in principle similar to civil emergency services, where public or private utility workers will perform corrective repairs to essential services and avail their services at all times. However, these services are at a cost for the service. An example would be an emergency plumber. An example would be an emergency plumber. Then as we continue progressively into the course, we are going to learn about emergency action plan. I'm just doing an introduction, but we're going to learn about an emergency action plans. And when we talk about emergency action plans, we are going to talk about emergency action principles. What are the principles for emergency action? Emergency action principles are key rules that guide the actions of rescuers and potential rescuers. Because of the inherent nature of emergencies, no two are likely to be the same. So emergency action principles help to guide rescuers at instances by sticking to some basic tenets. The adherence to and contents of principle by would-be rescuers varies widely based on the training the people involved in emergency have received, the support available from emergency services, and time it takes to arrive, and the emergency itself. Emergencies evolve in different ways. Emergencies evolve for different reasons. Emergencies are managed in different ways. So responders know that if it is a firearm attack, this is how we are supposed to respond. If it is a fire situation, this is how we are supposed to respond. If it is an assault with several people, this is how we are going to respond. So emergencies and also time taken to respond, depending on the location, from the responders to the location where they are. Response and time it takes to arrive is a problem, especially in our country. It takes a very long time before emergency services can arrive at a scene. Though there are improvements that have been noticed in few years ago, however, it still needs some improvement due to logistical issues, transport issues, and some other concerns, roads, condition of the roads, and other things, traffic and other things. However, response time it takes to arrive at the scene matters a lot during emergencies. We see that a key emergency principle. The key principle taught in almost all systems is that the rescuer, be they a lay person or a professional, should assess the situation for danger. That is the key principle. That if you are responding to any emergency situation, you first have to assess the area for danger, check for danger before you can go deeper into handling the situation. First of all, check for danger. Check for danger before you can start to respond to the situation. The reason that an assessment for danger is given such high priority is that it is core to emergency management, that rescuers do not become secondary victims of any incident, as this creates a further emergency that must be dealt with. You see? So if you go into a situation, you are going to respond to a situation, and then you become a secondary victim, and now they need to respond again to you, first of all, to check on you, save you, before they can rescue the other people. It becomes a complicated matter. So the number one principle is that you assess the situation. A typical assessment for danger should involve observation of the surrounding. Just simple observation of the surrounding. is very important, starting with the cause of the accident, e.g., a failing object or expanding outward to include any situational hazards, e.g., fast-moving traffic and history or secondary information given by witnesses who are bystanders. Once a primary danger assessment has been completed, this should not end the system of checking for danger, but should inform all other parts of the process. If at any time the risk from any hazard poses a significant danger to the people who are responding, then decisions should be made on how to approach the situation or how to approach the issue. If you attended the fire class that we did last semester, we said clearly that if you are responding to a fire situation and you are entering a room filled with smoke and you are not wearing properly, you are not wearing proper kit for firefighters, the hood, the helmet, the fireman's suit, the boots, then it is a smoke-filled room. Please do not access this room, because we saw that smoke is the number one killer of people who respond or people who happen to be in a fire situation. And then we also look at categories of emergencies. This is what we are going to look at: categories of emergencies. We are going to say electrical failure. We are going to say gas leak. We are going to look at protests or demonstrations. Food poisoning is also a category. And then we also look at robbery with violence, sudden death. We are going to look at terrorism, active shooter situations. We are going to look at windstorms, a medical emergency, and also fire emergencies. Those are some of the categories. Those are some of the things that we shall learn as we move ahead on how to manage these situations, because managing these situations happens in very different ways. The way you respond to a fire emergency is not the same as the way you respond to a terrorism threat or an active shooter situation. So these situations, you respond to them in very different ways. So we are going to discuss these things in detail as we move ahead. And then we say priorities in all situations. Number one is to save life. Saving life is the number one priority. And then number two is to administer first aid. Administer first aid. And then number three is to control the situation. And then number four is to protect welfare of people. And then number five is to safeguard property. Those are the priorities. If you are asked, please detail or explain the priorities in all situations that can be classified as emergencies. You start with number one is saving life. Number two is to administer first aid. Number three is to control the situation. Number four is to protect welfare of people. Number five is to safeguard property. And then we are also going to learn about crisis management circle. We are going to look at preparedness. We are going to look at response. We are going to look at recovery. We are going to look at mitigation. These are some of the things that we are going to learn in our course as we go along. I'm doing an introduction and I'm just opening your mind on what is ahead of us. And then we are also going to look at crisis management plans at organizational level. We are going to see a crisis management plan is a document that describes the processes that an organization should use to respond to a critical situation that could adversely affect its profitability, reputation, or ability to operate. The 5 steps for drafting a crisis management plan are ground rules and risk assessment, business impact analysis, response and contingency planning, training and coordination, and review. These are the things that you should now start to learn as you grow in your career. When you become a manager, a security manager, these are the things that you will be dealing with. These are the things that you will be doing, crafting, developing crisis and emergency plans for a particular organization. And then we say the National Crisis Management Framework provide a comprehensive approach to understanding the components of a crisis, or the 5 P's of the crisis management: predict, prevent, prepare, perform, post, action, and assessment. So we are also going to learn about these things in detail as we move ahead. With those few remarks, I want to say thank you very much. We have come to the end of our first presentation, which is introduction to emergency incidences. As we move ahead, we are going to pick on the next topics and see how we cover these things. I'm going to try my level best to introduce more material and more knowledge beyond the scope of the course outline, because I want to do it in a very different way until we conclude with how do you develop an emergency action plan for your organization. And then we are also going to look at emergency issues that may occur at the workplace and how do you handle them. What should you take into consideration as a security professional? With those few remarks, I say thank you. We are going to meet again next weekend for our second lesson. Bye bye.